Hello, so I'm going to be taking you through how to get tilde set up for development. So I've just cloned tilde, and inside this directory where I am you can see all the tilde things that you will clone. The only thing here that you won't recognize is that, but we'll get to it in a little bit. You can see that there's a quick start here. I'm effectively following this thing. And then the other thing to know is that there's 3 applications that I'm going to get running now. There's a database, first of all, and that's just a Postgres database in a Docker composition. Then the back end relies on that database, and this is a Django application. And then the front end talks to APIs exposed by the back end, and this front end is a React application. So the way I like to set this up is 3 columns. So here I'm just going to go to database. And if I look here, there's Cloud SQL and localhost. I'm going to be using localhost. Cloud SQL is like a proxy thing that we use, like if you want to connect to a Cloud SQL instance, which we don't right now, but that's just what that is for. Cool. So now I'm here, and you can see that there's a whole bunch of weird things here. You only really care about Docker Compose, and I'm just going to say Docker Compose up, and now my database is running, and it's as simple as that. Then over here, I'm going to see the into my backend. So as mentioned, the backend is a Django application, and Django, like, you can't use it unless you're using Python 3. So if you're running it in Python 2, you will get weird errors. It is inevitable. Yeah. So I'm going to start off by making a thing called a virtual environment. And even before that, I'm going to install this thing called Python 3 dev. So what that is if you're trying to install stuff in Python with Python's own package manager and you come up with weird errors about like python.h headers not available, then it means that you need to install the developer headers on your system, and then that should sort that out. Cool. So now I'm going to say Python 3-m venv. So I'm saying like Python 3, there's a module called venv, which is for creating a virtual environment, and I'm going to use that, and I'm going to make a virtual environment, and I'm going to name that venv. So our git ignore is set up to ignore folders named venv, so it is convenient for you to name yours like that. If you name it something else, then please make sure that you don't add it to Git, because it's got all sorts of like personal paths in and stuff like that. Cool, so I'm just going to do that. Right, and then if I look here, like venv is actually a directory. So that's why I said like don't add it, like make sure you don't add this thing to Git. We don't want your venv, I want my own venv. Yeah, so now I need to activate my virtual environment. So I say source, then source, then activate. And if you're familiar with Bash, you'll recognize that source command. It's just saying like, like activate is a Bash script. And so if you wanted, hypothetically speaking, to have a bunch of environmental variables available whenever you were whenever you're working in your backend, then you can add them to this script here. So if I said like, instead of source, if I say nano, then this is what's inside that file, and I can export stuff here. So it's just like a little trick. So if I source that again, and then I can say echo, what did I call it? Hi. Oh, what? Oh. Little I. Cool. So it's this hi world. So when we get to like Google credentials and things like that, you can just stick them in your activate script, and then you don't need to care or worry about them for a very long time. Sweet. So next up, I want to make sure that I have everything installed so I can run my app and test it and all of that. So there was the development headers. Great. Now I'm going to say pip install wheel. Got to make sure that your virtual environment is active. Once wheel is installed, then you can say pip install requirements.txt. That's just a file that exists here, and it's just a list of like packages that we need. So you just install that, and it takes a little bit of time. In the meantime, I'm going to go into the front end over here. And since that's just a plain old React application, I'm going to say npm install. Just going to leave that to do its thing. Cool. So now everything's installed, and that's great. I'm going to make sure it was installed correctly by running my tests. And it's going to ask me a hard question. So just whenever your tests ask you a question, say yes. And you can see it's like saying some things about databases and whatnot. So these aren't true unit tests. They actually connect to a fake database and make actual instances and that kind of thing. So it's more of an integration test, really. Sweet. So my tests pass, and that's wonderful. Now I'm going to make a super user. So I'm going to say Python. Oh, actually, even before that, actually, let me show you this error. Python manage.py. So manage.py is very useful. Use it for like all of the things. Create super user. And it's going to say something red and shouty about unapplied migrations. So Django's cool because you can specify the shape of your database in the Python code, but then you have to tell Django to create the tables so that you can do things like store super users in your tables. So if it complains about unapplied migrations, that's what it's talking about. So I need to run this command called migrate. Boom. And that'll take a little bit of time. You can see there's a whole lot of those. Create super user. Wonderful. No more errors. Cool. So I'm logging in with, well, I'm setting up my actual email address, and I'll show you why in a little bit. Wonderful. Now, what I can do is I can say Python manage py run server. And that starts the development server at blah, 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 8,000. So if I go here, wonderful. So it just says health check OK, which isn't super useful. Anyway, so now I can go admin. And this is the Django admin. And I can say, Sheena, I can log in, and everything's wonderful. Great. So here I can manage whatever I want. So you probably don't want to touch those. That actually isn't being used. But users and user groups, that's pretty cool. You might want to play around with those. You might want to play around with some agile cards that you can give to your users, and then you can get them to show up later on. And then there's also this thing, which is the browsable API. So we use Django REST framework. And basically you can run around and explore here and do different interesting things. Yeah, so these APIs that are documented here, this is what the front end uses. Cool. So on that note, let's go to the front end. And here I'm just going to say, I can also say npm test. There aren't a lot of tests, which is very naughty. Whoa. Everything should pass. I can say npm start. And that'll open this thing up. Takes a little bit of time. I like to have a console open in case of emergencies. Okay, cool. So if I click on that, it's just going to come up with an error. So like right now, our only login mechanism for this is login with Google. But in order to get that thing sorted out, we need certain parameters set up, certain environmental variables. So, and it needs to be set up in the back end and the front end. So I've sent, like in the quickstart, there's a link to a tutorial about how to get your own credentials, but then also we've got some dev credentials. So I'm just going to use our dev credentials, which I've stored in gitignore. So I'm going to say source gitignore secrets. So like this gitignore directory, I always just I always set up my .gitignore to ignore directories named gitignore, because then it's just like nice and explicit. So I source that here, and I'm going to source it here as well. So you could also like add these secret values into your activate script, which is why I was showing you that little trick earlier. So now I'm going to do that and do that. And this time I should get a window and I should be able to log in with my email address. And yay, I don't see a lot going on here because I haven't made any user groups and I haven't made any cards. But if there are user groups and there are cards, then this is it. And I can log out again. And that's that.